Hey y'all, so it's been like 3 weeks since I've recorded a video, so I am a little rusty at this, but today I'm going to be doing some Halloween movie recommendations. And as I was compiling this list, I realized that pretty much all of the movies fell into one of three categories, so that's how this video will be divided up. So those three categories are 1. Campy/comedic movies. Some of these are scary, some of these are not, but they all have some sense of comedy to them. 2. Movies that mess with your mind or would fall under psychological thrillers. And 3. Paranormal movies. However, there is one movie that doesn't fall into these categories, so I figured I would talk about it first. If you are wanting to watch a gory musical that is also a horror movie, Sweeney Todd. Sweeney Todd is one of my favorite movies of all time. It's a great Halloween movie because it's really gory, and if you love musicals, definitely check it out, plus Johnny Depp. Okay, so now on to the first section, which are the comedic/campy movies. And there are 4 movies in this category, 2 of which are not scary movies at all. They're just fun Halloween movies, and 2 of which are actually scary movies. So the first of these, which I would recommend to people who kind of want to watch a classic movie, but they don't want to watch a scary movie, and that would be The Ghost and Mr. Chicken. This movie stars Don Knotts from The Andy Griffith Show, and it's about this guy who is trying to become a reporter, and he finally gets this like big break where he has to stay in a haunted house overnight, and hilarious comedy ensues. There are minor scares, but it's really overall just a comedy, and it's really great for Halloween because it's kind of got that spooky vibe, but it's really not scary and it's pretty family friendly. And the second comedic non-scary movie that I would recommend is Clue. Clue is one of my absolute favorite movies of all time. It's just so much fun, it's so ridiculous, and it's great for Halloween because it's a bunch of people trapped in this mansion and it's a murder mystery, and it's just so campy and ridiculous, but so wonderful. So now moving on to the 2 actual horror movies that have comedic and campy elements, and the first of those is The Evil Dead. The Evil Dead is just absolutely ridiculous. However, it's also very gory and graphic, so even though that R rating is like 30 years old, still listen to it. It's an R-rated movie, trust me. But yeah, even through all the gore, it's still just an absolutely ridiculous movie because a lot of the stuff that happens in it, it's just really campy, really fun, and it's a more lighthearted horror movie. And the last of the campy movies is actually one of my more recent favorite horror movies, and that is Scream. What makes Scream so interesting is that Wes Craven is really playing with a lot of the horror movie stereotypes while still making a legitimate, gory, scary horror movie. So like with The Evil Dead, although the gore is definitely there, it also has a really great campy factor that I personally really love. So now on to the second category, which are the psychological thrillers. Now, a lot of these still retain some sort of paranormal elements to them, but I put them under this category because they have some sort of messing with your mind element to them. The first one of these is one that doesn't really have any paranormal elements to it, and that is The Strangers. This movie is all about a couple being tormented by these people who are trying to get into their house and attack them. And it also has some really, really clever elements in it which make me really appreciate it because it's probably not all the way up there as far as my favorite horror movies, but there are definitely a lot of really quality moments in this movie, and if you're looking for like pure mess with your mind, no paranormal elements, I would definitely recommend this one. Next on the list is a pretty standard, well-known one that you should not watch if you have a weak stomach, and that is Saw. Saw is just such a wonderful psychological thriller because it's scary and gory, but it's got a really interesting story to it as well, and there are definitely some really amazing moments in this movie. It's just one of my absolute favorites. I would put it probably in my top 3 to 5 scary movies of all time. It's just really wonderful, and if you can stomach the gore, I would definitely recommend it. Following that one up with another extremely well-known movie that messes with your mind, the next one is The Shining. Like with Saw, The Shining is one of my absolute favorite horror movies of all time, like top 3 for sure. It's one of my favorite movies, and it's so great at messing with your mind and your sense of reality. And it's one of the only like classic horror movies that I really love because it's not very heavy on special effects, which can be dated really quickly. It just messes with your mind, and that can last forever. It's still just as scary now as it was back in 1980 when it was first made. It's not just one of my favorite scary movies of all time, it's one of my favorite movies of all time in general. And if you are looking for a classic horror movie that is more of a psychological thriller, definitely check this one out. So the next movie on this list I don't typically consider as a scary movie. It is technically a horror movie, but it's not really that scary. However, it is really good at messing with your mind, and that is 1408. Now, I don't think this is a very popular opinion, but I actually really enjoy 1408. It's not one of my favorite movies of all time, but it's actually a really interesting movie, and I really like the way that it messes with your perception of reality. Overall, it's nowhere near the scariest movie on this list, but I think it's a pretty quality movie, and it messes with your mind in a really interesting way. And the last one under the psychological thriller category that I'm going to recommend is a pretty unknown one, and that is The Caller. In this movie, the main character moves into a new apartment, and there's this phone that she can't get rid of, and she starts getting these weird calls and some really weird things start happening. I don't want to go into any more detail because I don't want to spoil anything, because this movie is really good at doing some unexpected things. There were definitely moments in this movie that I was shocked by, and that doesn't happen to me much anymore in horror movies, but this one managed to do it. If you're like me and have seen a ton of horror movies and want something different and something a little bit less well known, I would definitely check out The Caller because, like I said, it is more unknown and it does do some pretty interesting things that you probably aren't expecting. And now moving into the last category, which are the paranormal movies, and you'll notice that I have not yet said this is my favorite horror movie, and that's because my favorite horror movie falls under this category. And I'm gonna leave it for last just to build the suspense. So the first one I'm going to mention under the paranormal category is Sinister. It has a really interesting mystery to it, and it's really interesting to try to figure it out as the main character does, and to see all these clever little hints that are hidden throughout as the story goes along. This one could kind of fall under the messes with your mind category, but I personally think that it fits best underneath the paranormal category because the paranormal elements are kind of what separates it from some other things. And I don't want to go into too much detail, but yeah, this is a really interesting one and the paranormal elements are really cool. Next up is The Conjuring. The Conjuring is actually the most recent addition to this list because I saw it sometime in the past year and I really, really enjoyed it. It's really hard for a scary movie to scare me. Like, pretty much none of these movies on this list have actually scared me. It's just not something that happens. But The Conjuring came pretty close. I would say that The Conjuring is like a really well-rounded movie because it's got a really interesting plot, and it's also got some really good scares thrown in too. So yeah, I definitely think The Conjuring is one worth watching if you don't get scared super easily. Next up is Insidious, which is another of my pretty top tier horror movies. Which is surprising because it is a PG-13 movie, and it's really rare for me to actually enjoy PG-13 scary movies because they tend to not be very scary or very good. But in this case, Insidious is actually kind of both. Granted, it's not the scariest movie on this list, but it's actually pretty great and scarier than some R-rated movies that I've seen. So like a lot of the other movies that I've mentioned on this list, I just think that Insidious offers both some pretty good scares and a really interesting plot. And while the second movie isn't amazing, I did watch it and enjoy it, and I think that it added even more to the already interesting plot. So even though the scares aren't quite as good in the second one, the plot is still really intriguing, and if you liked the first one, I would definitely recommend that you check out the second one. But I haven't seen the third one because even I think that's going a little too far. And finally, the last movie that I'm going to mention, both in the paranormal category and just in this video in general, and that is my favorite horror movie of all time, The Ring. I love everything about this movie. This is one of my ultimate favorite movies of all time. The plot is so interesting. There are some pretty decent scares in there. It messes with your mind a little bit. It's just overall a really, really awesome horror movie, and I love it so, 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 so much. And also, it's got a pretty decent sequel. It's not my favorite movie of all time, but it does a pretty good job of continuing the storyline and adding more intrigue. Just overall, The Ring has a really interesting mystery, and it's also got some really great scares in it. And it's my favorite horror movie of all time. It's one of my top 10 movies of all time. It's just, I love The Ring so, so, so much. So that is it for my Halloween movie recommendations. I hope that there are people like me who have procrastinated a ton and are looking at the last second to find some movies, because this video is probably gonna go up at like 5 in the evening at the earliest. So yeah, hopefully this helps you find a Halloween movie to watch. Let me know down in the comments what some of your favorite Halloween/scary movies are. As always, I will leave links down in the description to my blog, Twitter, and Goodreads. Please add me as a friend on Goodreads. I would love to be friends with all of you. Like, comment, subscribe, all that jazz. Thank you so much for watching. Bye!